after the election, the federal election, I had the great pleasure of speaking with Elisa Choy, an economist and data strategist, and one of the most intelligent and intuitive people I think I have ever interviewed. And we welcome Elisa Choy back. Hello, Elisa.
Good evening, Peter.
Because your predictions for the election were uncannily correct, Elisa, and all of which was done on emotional responses, wasn't it?
Yes, we were analysing internet engagement and content online for many weeks, and we were very accurate with the macro trends that predicted voter behaviour and surprisingly accurate with the seat calls. So I think we ended up with 77 seats to Labor, and I think we called 76 seats to Labor.
Wow, it was because it was a hard election to call.
Yes, it was.
Have you been as successful in other elections, Elisa?
We've looked at the US presidential election in 2020 and had similar success. Again, it was down to key states. And Trump versus Biden, everybody said it was going to be a Biden landslide, if you remember that narrative.
Yes, yes.
And clearly it wasn't, because Trump got very, very close to winning this time around. So we were accurate in calling the 7 of the key battleground states to determine the election outcome.
The polls, of course, became notorious after the Brexit poll and the first Trump election poll, didn't they? Because they were so wrong, Elisa.
Yes, and then they were so wrong again in 2020 with the US election, and they were so wrong again with the Australian federal election in 2019.
That's right, yes. So what went wrong?
Well, essentially, I always say the same thing about election polling is that you're collecting a P sample of people's opinions about what they think they will do in the future. And that sentence alone is loaded with 3 fallacies. So, the P sample to represent millions of people, that's one problem. The second one being what you ask someone what they will do in the future doesn't always correlate, particularly if it's emotive topics, then they don't feel comfortable telling you the truth of how they feel, like elections.
Yes.
And then the third one is you're asking the wrong question, because in this election we saw very clearly how the polls always were focused on the two-party preferred question. But we saw that 2 parties were not preferred.
I don't think we'll ever take women for granted in an Australian election again, will we, Elisa?
Well, let's see.
Yes.
This has been a very clear signal, I think, for many countries around the world. I mean, we're facing another US election next year. We've got the US midterms in November, and they have a very similar, they have lots of issues that are similar to ours, but I hope to see that we take women's voices more seriously, and I found it very interesting in this experience, also being close to the media, the level of bias that was in the coverage by the mainstream media here.
Elisa, now, what are the books in your life, Elisa?
Well, because you asked me to come on this show, I've actually had to dust off a few books that have been sitting on my night shelf for quite some time. So I've got quite an eclectic mix of books that you look at it and go, where is the common theme? There is none. So I don't know where
fair
to
enough.
start.
Yes. What did you read as a young person?
Oh, to be honest, Peter, I hated reading when I was young. Words weren't really my thing.
Numbers were.
Numbers were. I could sit with a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku puzzle, or but I guess English wasn't my first language as well. So I
what was, Elisa?
It was Cantonese.
I see. You from Hong Kong, or?
From Hong Kong.
Yes, I see.
So, and I studied Mandarin, so that was really my mother tongue, and so English wasn't my first language. However, having said that, even during high school, when we were asked to read in English, it was just stuff like Shakespeare. And honestly, English speaking or non-English speaking, it's just really difficult to digest the text.
Yes.
So I didn't find it particularly invigorating, and hence I developed this idea that I don't like reading, but actually I love reading now.
What changed your mind? What brought you round, Elisa?
I guess the ability to choose what I wanted to read.
Yes, quite.
In high school, you're given set text, right?
Yes.
And I appreciate what they were trying to do, but it really wasn't stuff that I was interested in reading. And to be fair, I mean, like, I wouldn't tell my teachers now. I mean, like, they wouldn't mind. But when we had to do essays and exams, I would never read the full text. I would go by the Cliff Notes or go to the Blockbuster store to rent out the VHS movie to get the gist of the story.
I think it's easier for kids now. I think there are set texts, but I think kids have more liberty as to what they can choose their own books to a degree, which is a good thing.
Oh, definitely, because reading is something that should be a joy. And it's like food. If we're forced to eat what we're forced to eat, you don't enjoy food.
Yes, true. So what do you read now?
So I have a nice mix of things from economics texts to spiritual texts to leadership texts to philosophy to business texts. So don't know which one you want to start with.
Economics.
Economics, okay. So I've been followed, as I am an economist, and so I am always fascinated about understanding systems of economy around the world. And the book that I particularly like, haven't finished yet. I'm notorious for starting and not finishing books, but there's this one that I'm reading called Contending Economic Theories, which sounds very heavy, and it's written like a university textbook, and it's written by Professor Richard Wolff, who's quite an esteemed economics professor. And in this book, he compares the three main theories of economy: neoclassical, Keynesian, and Marxian. So when you apply these theories over history and then you look at the relevance of these three theories over time, they've actually shaped capitalism in the Western world.
Yes.
And looking at how things have developed and moved along, we've got the Marxian versus the sort of Western Keynesian neoclassical view, which is the classic East versus West view, which is very relevant for today, isn't it? So I find it absolutely fascinating that really this is a time to look at these competing theories, because some are not relevant anymore in society.
There seems to be a lot of voodoo in economics, Elisa, but you might disagree with that as an economist.
Well, what do you mean by voodoo?
It seems to be, people just sort of have a stab. Or is it more scientific?
Well, I think there would be more science behind it. I mean, you wouldn't naturally think of economics as a science, but it actually is a science. It involves a lot of data. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of frameworks. There's a lot of things that are tested in market and reviewed. There's a lot of maths in it. And it's ultimately understanding how people behave in systems and how systems interconnect and how we organise ourselves.
And how dependent we are on systems.
And how dependent we are on systems and how everything is structured in either government or society in a system, whether it's overt or covert through culture.
Are we seeing the end of neoliberalism?
I don't know. because I think there are actually more evolved economic theories that I'm interested in looking at as well. There's one called donut economics, which is written by a female economics professor, and she goes into the idea of taking into account the environment and natural resources. There's all these old school theories is really focused on output, and the fundamental theory is that output is continually able to grow over time. But if you have more output, you need to take away from other things. And so donut economics actually looks at the environmental aspects and the social aspects of resources, inputs and outputs, so that you're not taking too much out, becomes out of balance.
That's very pertinent, isn't it? What's your Chinese heritage to you, Elisa?
My Chinese heritage. So do you mean where I come from or what
Yes.
my...
And in terms of your heritage.
My heritage. Okay, so my family come from a long line of entrepreneurs and business owners, the Choys, So we're not the medical dentist, optometrists. It's people. We're traders. And as you know, the Chinese are the oldest traders and merchant traders in the world, right?
Indeed.
And so I have family that obviously all of us originated as Han Chinese, which is the dominant class of Chinese.
Yes.
With the fair skin, and we came from the southern parts of China, my extended family, and they're the traders. And then during the war, when the Japanese invaded China, then a lot of people dispersed to Southeast Asia, and so my family dispersed to Indonesia. So I've got a lot of kids and cousins in Jakarta. We came to Australia. I've got aunties and cousins in the US. We've still got some in China. We're all over the place.
And you mentioned books on, spirituality. What are they, please?
Well, funny enough, I don't speak too much about the spiritual side of me, but it's really understanding the unexplainable. So there's a particular book that I picked up called Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's quite an old book written by Clarissa Estes, and she talks about the concept of wild women. So the inner life of women, it's through poetry and particularly how women have a creative and passionate, ageless power that we've lost over time. And so it's quite a heavy book, to be honest, which is why I haven't really cracked too much of it. But that is one element I love reading about, understanding the feminine energy and feminine spirit and nurturing that. I've got daughters, so I'm always interested in that.
What age are they?
They are twins and they're turning 8 in grade 2.
And will they follow you? Are they good with maths?
One is good with maths. The other one is not interested in maths. So they have their strengths.
And philosophy you read?
Yes, so there's a book that I've read called The Path, and it's written by Professor Michael Pewitt. I'm not even sure if I say his name right, but it goes through the different ancient Chinese philosophers, so Confucius, Mencius, Lao Tzu, all that. And it goes into how they explain and their teachings around decision-making and relationships. Again, it's for me to understand society over time and the systems and how we coordinated and what was valuable and what was self-righteous and what was important and respectable. I find it very fascinating. Eastern way of looking at things translated in a Western lens.
And were you ever shown racism, Elisa?
Oh, of course. This is Australia. I remember when I was a very young child, just migrating from Hong Kong. We lived in Adelaide, and my brother and I were the only Asians in the entire school, or bar one kid who was from Vietnam. So there was a lot of racism, and I remember. Yeah, all through my primary school there was a hint of racism. And also even today, like occasionally if you go to certain places, people might not say things to you, but they'll look at you a certain way. Not in Sydney. I think Sydney's very multicultural. People don't say it to you. But if you go out in certain regions of Australia, they haven't seen lots of different types of people before. So I think my theory around racism is that we can never get rid of it. In 100 years' time, there'll still be racism. In 100 years' time, there'll still be theft and murder and all the things that sort of plague society. So it's not so much we can't avoid it. I think it's a case of, I personally don't get impacted anymore by racism or sexism or ageism.
Because society's changed?
I think I've changed.
How have you changed?
I just don't care anymore.
It must have affected you as a child, though. It must have been hard.
I don't specifically remember feeling down about being, I think racism never really impacted me. I don't have any burning memories that caused me distress. I think I was more resilient in the sense that people just didn't want to pick on me because I did serve it back.
There's this, I'm always conscious of this. It's almost in the Australian DNA, Elisa Choy, that a fear of Asia, a fear of Asians. We can't seem to move away from that, can we? And it's politically manipulated too, isn't it? And it was ever thus.
Unfortunately, I do believe that it is designed that way to some extent, and the media, amplifies that. And I don't see it actually changing. To be honest, I'm quite surprised that in 2022 we're still talking about racism in Australia, where we are probably one of the most multicultural countries on earth. I just don't understand. I think ultimately, whether it's racism or any sort of discrimination, it just comes down to lack of respect for something or someone different. And I don't think we've learnt the art of constructive disagreement.
Yes. Well said. You're an extraordinary woman, Elisa, and it's been a great pleasure having you on again, and I wish you well, and no doubt we'll hear from you again. Good luck with your work. You are extraordinary. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Peter. Have a good evening.
Elisa Choy, thank you.